I'm Andrew Joseph Keith. I'm an online sculpting instructor, and in this video we're going to be sculpting this larger-than-life eye study. So in this video we're going to do a time lapse of one of the assignments for the portrait sculpting course that's over at Proko.com, and that's actually going to be the sponsor of this video. My courses, the portrait sculpting course as well as the Proko figure sculpting fundamentals course, both are excellent resources if you're interested in sculpting. And so if you're interested in joining the course and really expanding your knowledge of how to represent people, then I highly recommend it, and you can find links for those courses down in the description below. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing is building out the structure of the nose and the brow. This is what I like to do for all of my studies, all of my facial feature studies. I like to try to focus on the structure first, and so I'm thinking only about two planes, basically the plane of the nose, the center line of the face. I'm building that out, and then I'm just thinking about another line of clay for the brow ridge and just laying those in with pieces of clay and making sure to bring those out quite a bit from the surface so that I have plenty of space for the depth of the eye. Because a common beginner mistake when sculpting the eyes is to make them too shallow so that the eye itself comes a little bit too close to that front plane of the face, and there's not all that depth that exists in the eye. Now this eye is a male eye, so the brow ridge is a little bit more pronounced. On a female eye, typically the brow ridge is less pronounced, a little bit softer. So that's something else to be aware of depending on what you're using as a reference. I think for this one I used a little bit of my brother's eye as a reference as well as my own eye, and so I had some mirrors to observe myself, and then some images as well of my brother's eye. So then I'm coming in with a little bit of a ball of clay and just forming that with one piece of clay at a time, that half sphere for the eyeball. And now I'm going to come in and go ahead and add in some of the cheekbone and try to get an idea of the eye socket that surrounds the eye. The eye socket, the structure around the eye, is actually a lot more important than people realize. If you can get the structure around the eye to look right, to look correct, then it becomes much easier when you're working inside the eye with the details. And if you get the structure of the eye right, then the shadows will look natural, like the shadows that you can see on me from the light. Those shadows, if the structure around the eye wasn't right, those shadows won't look correct. And so even if you're able to sculpt a perfect eye when it comes to the eyeball and eyelids, if you don't have that bony structure around the eye correct, it's not going to look right. Sculpting just little by little, adding little pieces of clay at a time, looking at it from different directions. This side view is really important to judge the distances from the nose, from that center line of the nose back to that top eyelid, and then the eyeball and the lower eyelid, and then also the angles between those. The top eyelid comes over top of the eyeball more, the lower eyelid tucks underneath more. So there's kind of this shade or canopy that the top eyelid provides for the eye. And then on top of that, there's the brow ridge that comes out more, that provides more protection when things fall or anything like that. You'll also notice that on the upper eyelid, it extends over top of that lower eyelid on the outside corner of the eye. That's a really important thing to realize, is how those overlap one another as they come towards the outside part of the eye. So just taking little pieces of clay, now I've built out the thickness of the eyelids. You can see I've exaggerated it quite a bit. That's a pretty normal thing to do in sculpting. Sculpting the eyes is to make the eyelids a little bit thicker, and the reason for that is they are naturally pretty thick, but it just adds contrast to the eye. So even though this is thicker than it would be in real life, it makes the eye feel more important because there's more contrast with the lights and shadows when you add a little bit thicker of a ridge for the eyelids. And so that's one of the reasons that, like if you look at a David sculpture or other past sculptural masters, they often sculpt the eyelids very thick. And so that's something else that I'm doing with this study. And now I'm starting to come in with a tool and clean things up a little bit, looking for subtle changes. You can see on the lower eyelid, there's kind of a bump right at the top edge of the lower eyelid, and then also and then it follows that sphere of the eyeball. And just coming in, grabbing little pieces of clay with this tool and adding them to the surface, building it out just one form at a time. And so if you are interested in sculpting, in the portrait sculpting course, we go over a bunch of different things that'll really help you master the portrait. So there's studies like this. This is actually one of the assignments for the course, doing this twice life-size eye study. And in the premium course, I have longer demos that take you a little bit more step-by-step through my process of sculpting this study as well as other studies. And then I also go over the anatomy of the skull, the anatomy of the muscles of the face, which is really complicated, so that's a really helpful thing. And then also the fat pads of the face, which I think are just as important, if not more important, than learning all of the muscles, because the fat pads really give a lot of information to the forms of the face. And I learned a lot when I was studying more on the fat pads of the face. And there'll be a part a little bit later where you see more of these fat pads when it comes to the eye. There's a fat pad above the eyeball. That's the superior orbital fat pad. And then there's the inferior orbital fat pad. That's the bag under the eyes. And on me, it's pretty pronounced, this little fat pad underneath the eyes. And so being aware of those features, the different fat pads around the eyes. There's also some, there's fat pads, the lateral orbital fat pad that's on the side. And so just knowing those features is really helpful. And also in the course, we'll be going over, we'll do these assignments, we'll sculpt the skull. We also will be focusing on, the main assignment is a self-portrait. So if you'd like to have a guide to do a step-by-step self-portrait in clay so that you can have something that looks like yourself, so you can sculpt something, so you can sculpt a convincing self-portrait that's impressive. If you're interested in that, I hope you'll join the course, because it is a really fun thing to be able to sculpt something convincingly. And it's difficult, I'm not going to lie. Sculpting the eye, if you've tried it before, you know that it's not very easy, and there's a lot that goes into it. It's a lot harder than it looks. So being able to break it down into steps and then follow those steps, it just makes it a little bit easier, but it's still going to be a challenge. So if you're interested in a challenge and challenging yourself, then I definitely recommend checking out the full courses, whether it's the portrait sculpting course or the full figure sculpting course. I've had a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot making those. So you can see I've put the sculpture down on the side just to look at it from different angles. I'm trying to constantly move the sculpture around to study it from different angles and get an idea of what the eye looks like from below, from above, from the side view, because from every different angle, there's more information that's difficult to read unless you're actually observing that angle. So it's really hard, if I'm looking straight on at the camera, it's really hard to tell how far back the eye is from this high point of the nose. It's really hard to tell how far back that is. But if you look at the side, then all of a sudden it becomes very easy to see those depths. And so it's the same thing with any other, if you're looking from above, from below, it just becomes easier to see some of the forms in a way that was difficult to read from a different angle. So I'm constantly turning the sculpture, moving around, looking at it from above, looking at it from below. I have on the side, you can see I have a little mirror that I'm using to use my own eye as a reference. And now I'm coming in and trying to be more precise with the folds of the eye, with the corner of the eye socket, that little bony bump in the corner of the eye socket. All of those features, I want to just push a little bit closer to what I'm seeing in my reference, in myself. Whether it's a loop tool or the stainless steel tool that just allows me to push clay around and move things little by little. The further along you get, the smaller the adjustments that you're making. So starting off, I'm adding lots of clay. It's building up really pretty quickly. But then as it gets further and further along, you slow down more and more. And that's what tools are for. They're to help you slow down and be a little bit more precise with how you're moving the clay and how you're treating the surface as you're developing the sculpture. The eyebrow is, it's just another form. I try to think of it as just another form and not as a different material. Like we like to think of it, hair, so we got to sculpt all of those individual hairs. But I recommend just treating it as a form. So it's just pieces of clay to build up this form of the eyebrow. You can see I'm just trying to push and pull the surface. It's called additive sculpture, and that's because you can add clay to the surface and then remove clay really easy. So just pushing and pulling things slowly. And this was a big project. The larger you sculpt something, the more time it's going to take. So this one took quite a while. I think it was like 15 hours of sculpting. By the time I finished, 15, 20 hours, something like that. And so it was a big project, but I was really happy with the end result. And it's really fun to sculpt something that you're happy with. And sculpting something this size is just really impressive. And I still have the original clay sculpture because I didn't want to, I took a mold and then cast it in plaster, but I didn't want to undo the original clay just because I liked how it looks, this larger than life eye study. Really, really fun. So here I'm just using my tool, clarifying the eye, trying to make sure that I have an accurate ball shape for the sphere of the eye ball. And then coming and smoothing things out. The mistake a lot of beginners make is to make these secondary forms, like the transitions between those parts of the lower eyelid, the forms of the lower eyelid, to make those too exaggerated, too not subtle enough. So you want to go for subtlety and softness as much as you can. Here I scooped out a bowl for the eyeball, or for the iris, for the colored part of the eye, and then a smaller bowl shape, or a smaller hole for the center of the eye, the pupil of the eye. And this is kind of interesting because I like to sculpt the eyes like this, because then the highlight on the eyeball is opposite the highlight on the iris, and so it kind of mimics. It's an optical illusion that kind of mimics how the lens of the eye actually bounces light when you're looking at the eyeball. And so that's how I like to do this. Here I'm coming in, and you can see I'm building up the form of that superior orbital fat pad that's kind of coming towards the inside of the eye. That's what that is. And so I wanted to give more of an indication of that. And some of these features, once you learn about it, you can choose to exaggerate them. You can choose to make them more obvious or less obvious, depending on the type of sculpture you're going for. But if you don't realize that those features are there, like if you don't realize what that fat pad is, then you might ignore it completely, so it's not there, or you might see a form but not be able to represent it in an accurate way, in a way that's soft and pillowy, like that fat pad is in the eyeball or in the eye socket. So I definitely recommend, if you're interested in portrait sculpting, being able to study those features, study the fat pads, the muscles. The more information that you have, the more you're able to control what information you're exaggerating and what information you're able to hide. Because you can always hide more information, make things simpler, but you can't make things convincingly more complex unless you have that knowledge. And so that's a really important thing to realize when you're an artist. The more, knowledge is power. The more knowledge you have about the human form, then the more power you have to convey whatever message you're trying to get across as an artist. So now I'm just cleaning things up, final cleanup, and there we have it, the finished eye study. This is like twice life size, or maybe a little bit larger. If you found this video helpful, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, You can also find more videos on the Proco 3D YouTube channel. That's where all of the free video lessons from the portrait sculpting course and the figure sculpting course are available. I hope that you'll check out those premium courses, and if you can, I hope you join the course. I'd love to see your work over at Proco.com. Stay productive, stay creative. I'll see you around.